The state that has never executed a woman. Idaho has never executed a woman. There were no executions from 1958 to 1972, when the United States Supreme Court decision Furman v. Georgia struck down all death penalty statutes across the United States and created an effective moratorium on executions. In the United States, it is estimated that 3% of U.S. executions in the period from 1890 to 2010 were botched. Over those 120 years, 8,776 people were executed, and 276 of those executions went wrong in some way. Lethal injection had the highest rate of botched executions. Botched executions occur when there is a breakdown in, or departure from, the protocol for a particular method of execution. The protocol can be established by the norms, expectations, and advertised virtues of each method or by the government's officially adopted execution guidelines. Botched executions are those involving unanticipated problems or delays that caused, at least arguably, unnecessary agony for the prisoner or that reflect gross incompetence of the executioner. Examples of such problems include, among other things, inmates catching fire while being electrocuted, being strangled during hangings, and being administered the wrong dosages of specific drugs for lethal injections. Idaho statutes provides the death penalty for perjury causing execution of an innocent person as well. The death penalty can be applied in any case for perjury causing execution of an innocent person, and no aggravated factors have to be proven in order for the death penalty to be given. The execution of one of the nation's longest-serving death row inmates was put on hold, the latest in a number of botched lethal injections across the country. Thomas Eugene Creech, 73, was convicted of 5 murders in 3 states and was sentenced to death after killing a fellow prisoner in 1981. Lethal injection is the most common execution method in the United States, but officials have struggled to both find the drugs necessary and find suitable veins to inject them into. Creech was born on September 9, 1950, in Hamilton, Ohio. He grew up in an unstable household where his parents frequently argued with one another, eventually leading to a divorce. Creech was left to live with his father, who years later would die from unclear causes right in front of him. At that time, he claimed to have attacked the nurse who had tended to his father. In 1975, Thomas Eugene Creech was convicted of first-degree murder in the deaths of Edward T. Arnold and John W. Bradford and was sentenced to death. 4 years later, on the basis of the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Woodson v. North Carolina, 428 U.S. 280, the Idaho Supreme Court held that the statute under which Creech had been sentenced was unconstitutional, because it provided for a mandatory death penalty. Creech's sentence was commuted to life imprisonment. Thomas Creech is a serial killer. He has admitted to killing or participating in the killing of at least 26 people. The bodies of 11 of his victims who were shot, stabbed, bitten, or strangled to death have been recovered in 7 states. In 1981, while serving his life sentence in prison, Creech killed again. Creech was an inmate of the Idaho State Correctional Institution. The victim, Dale Jensen, had been convicted of car theft and was in the same institution. Some years earlier, Jensen had been shot in the head, which had necessitated the removal of part of his brain and the placement of a plastic plate in his skull. His speech and motor functions were somewhat impaired. Both Creech and Jensen were housed in maximum security, where ordinarily only one inmate at a time was allowed out of his cell. Creech, however, had been made a janitor, and while performing his cleaning duties he was allowed to be out of his cell, while another inmate also was out. Creech and Jensen were not on good terms. They had argued over television and over Jensen's littering, which Creech, as a janitor, particularly resented. The circumstances surrounding Jensen's death are unclear, because Creech has given different accounts. It appears that on the day of the murder, Jensen approached Creech and swung a weapon at him. The weapon consisted of a sock containing batteries. Creech took the weapon away from Jensen, who returned to his cell, but emerged with a razor blade taped to a toothbrush. Jensen made some movement toward Creech, who then struck Jensen between the eyes with the battery-laden sock, knocking Jensen to the floor. According to Creech's version, Jensen swung at him with the razor blade, and he hit Jensen with the battery-filled sock. The plate in Jensen's skull was shattered, and blood from Jensen's skull splashed on the floor and walls. When Jensen was helpless, Creech kicked him about the throat and head. Sometime later, a guard found Jensen, who was taken to the hospital where he died the same day. Over the objections of his counsel, Creech pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing, testimony was offered by both the state and the defense on Creech's mental condition. The district court did not expressly rule on Creech's sanity, but he did rule that Creech was of adequate intelligence and capable of being trained and educated. After the sentencing hearing, the judge found that Creech did not instigate the fight with the victim and that Creech was initially justified in protecting himself. However, the judge also found that the victim, once the attack commenced, was under the complete domination and control of the defendant, and that the murder itself was extremely gruesome, evidencing an excessive violent rage. The violence went well beyond self-defense, and appears to have been an intentional, calculated act. The judge sentenced Creech to death, saying he intentionally destroyed another human being at a time when he was completely helpless. After a couple of appeals and petitions in the Idaho courts and an unsuccessful petition to the United States Supreme Court, in 1985 Creech filed a habeas petition with the federal district court. The court denied the petition. Creech went to the United States Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, and in 1991 the Court of Appeals held part of the Idaho death penalty statute unconstitutional. The court also found two other defects in the original sentencing. In 1993, the U.S. Supreme Court reversed the Court of Appeals and upheld the Idaho statute, but did not consider the other aspects of the Ninth Circuit's holding. The case was returned to the Idaho courts for resentencing. It remains pending. In 2020, Creech and another death row inmate, Gerald Pizzuto, filed a federal lawsuit in which they claimed their rights were violated by the state's secrecy surrounding the execution protocol. The lawsuit was thrown out by U.S. District Court Judge David Nye, citing their ongoing appeals as a prime factor of why it has no current standing. On February 28, 2024, Creech's execution was set to proceed. However, 1 hour past the designated 10 a.m. execution time, it was announced that the medical team had failed to successfully establish an IV line for the lethal injection drugs. The execution was called off and Creech was escorted back to his cell. Thank you for watching Death Row.